The Club of Rome was a group of European sort of capitalist elite bureaucrats who came together out of this concern that the kind of problems of mankind, the world problematique, as they called it, exceeded in complexity the institutional structures and the knowledge institutions that existed for kind of comprehending and governing these problems. So he commissioned the Limits to Growth report as the first kind of global model to attempt to model the world system. And they ended up using the industrial dynamics technique of Jay Forrester at MIT, who had done this to try to sort of model the complex relations between labor and capital in the modern firm. And in this discourse of kind of global resource scarcity and beginning to articulate the problems of resource scarcity as a kind of global problem and the earth as a kind of global commons, the underside of that is very much an anxiety, especially in countries like Italy that the founder of the Club of Rome was a big Italian industrialist, and so were many of the other members. The sort of less powerful European countries were in particular in a position to be concerned with their own access to resources and the access of those corporations' access to resources in a moment when their governments couldn't necessarily guarantee this anymore. And so in this period when you have increasingly sovereign control of third world nations, post-colonial nations, over their own resources, this language of the kind of global commons and the idea, very directly articulated by Aurelio Peccei, the founder of the Club of Rome, that, resources can't belong by geographical accident to any particular country. They're the property of kind of mankind as a whole, becomes very politically mobilizing as a way of, securing access to those resources when the fear really is that, Venezuela might not let you have access to its oil, or that countries might exercise that sovereign control in a way that's not in the interest of Europe and of the United States. And so this language of the global commons in the context of, post-colonial change becomes a really powerful sort of political tool that I think you're suggesting the kind of politics of surveillance is very much in some ways a continuation of.
And in debates about how to apply, for instance, remote sensing, there are the concerns of developing countries that you will have more knowledge of our resources than we do.
Right. Yeah.
So you can buy up areas which we think are useless, and then you appropriate what should have been rightly ours.
Yeah.
So a continuation of, or a fear for the continuation of colonialism. And this is where I think you put it succinctly about the double-edged aspect of environmental movements and concerns, that the arguments to develop surveying systems from the developing countries is for environmental reasons. We need to understand the limits to growth. We need to accommodate the resources for a growing population, demands for investment in future enterprises. So for this, we need this information. And of course, we can give it to you, but it's as if the technology surpasses or just jumps over the political ramifications. What happens when you have a technology that changes meaning? Like, you had the models from Limits to Growth. The origin from the Club of Rome could itself be problematic, given that what is common is actually quite particular, or what is universal is specifically in a European or Western context. But what happens with those models when you develop later on other models on the same basis, or the environmental surveillance, which then feeds into geopolitics? Just one example would be the Chernobyl accident, where you have a satellite built to survey environment, and sure, the nuclear radiation is an environmental issue, but that had huge geopolitical ramifications to disseminate that image in '86.
I don't think that dynamical modeling could not be part of a sophisticated, critical, progressive project. I think that there was historically a response to the limits to growth that from the Bariloche Institute in Argentina that said, essentially, we reject this, capitalist, first world articulation of global problems in terms of third world population growth and, this kind of need for stability. And they produced a Latin American world model that was explicitly Marxist and explicitly normative in in trying to sort of understand the conditions of possibility for a socialist society. That was in 1974, and actually the same year, the geographer David Harvey published a paper critiquing the limits to growth and saying essentially, there's no reason that these new technologies of modeling couldn't do exactly what, Marxist analysis has always sought to do in terms of understanding structural causality and complexity. But the only difference is that it has to be dialectically adaptive in its relation to its own concepts. It has to be able to look back at its own conceptual parameters and frameworks and question those and transform those in relation to the thing that it studies. It can't presume this kind of one-way objective relation.